Hi, welcome to our podcast. Really hope you'll enjoy.
Welcome to the deep dive, where we take a bunch of sources and pull out the interesting bits, the really valuable stuff, just for you.
Right. Kind of like a concentrated dose of knowledge, but without the information overload.
Exactly. And today we're diving into this awesome conversation between Lex Fridman and the ThePrimeagen.
Oh yeah, I listened to that one. It was pretty wide-ranging.
Yeah, they talk about everything from like the raw excitement of programming to the latest in AI, how to get things done, and even some pretty personal stuff.
Yeah, like some real-life stories mixed in with all the tech talk.
Yeah, and our goal here is to pull out those key takeaways, the aha moments,
Stuff that makes you think differently.
Exactly. And we want this to resonate whether you're, coding every day, just curious about tech, or even just trying to figure out life in general.
Yeah, because a lot of the themes they touch on they're pretty universal.
Totally.
Yeah.
And don't worry if your tech knowledge is, all over the place. We're going to break everything down nice and easy like we're just chatting with a friend.
Yeah, no jargon overload here.
Okay, so the ThePrimeagen, he starts off talking about that initial spark you get with programming.
Oh yeah, that moment you realize you can actually solve problems, like real problems.
Exactly. Even seemingly simple ones. He mentions the decorator pattern, which might sound kind of technical, but
It's really not that complicated.
no, not really. It's more about like realizing you can add features to your code in a really flexible way.
Yeah, without having to like rewrite everything from scratch.
Right. And this early exposure really highlights a key point, which is that software design doesn't always have to be super rigid.
Hmm.
Like following all these strict
Yeah,
rules.
patterns like decorators, they offer a lot of flexibility to add new functionality without messing with the core stuff.
Makes things much easier to maintain in the long run, for sure. And then he gets kind of philosophical about a linked list.
Oh, linked lists, class.
Right. So imagine like a chain where each link only knows about the next link, not the whole chain.
Each one just points to the next one.
Right. And he compares this to human networks, like,
Yeah.
billions of people, and we mostly just know our local connections.
It's a pretty cool analogy, actually.
Yeah, and it shows how like complex behavior, like on a large scale, can emerge from these simple local interactions.
It's true for data structures, but also like, social systems, even biological systems.
Everywhere.
Exactly. And of course he points out this interconnectedness, it can have downsides too.
Like memory leaks.
Oh yeah, the dreaded memory leaks.
Where bits of memory get lost because those connections, they're not managed properly.
Yeah, classic programming headache.
Okay, and then there's this almost legendary moment of understanding recursion.
Recursion. It either clicks or it doesn't.
Right. He jokes that the standard factorial example, it ever really did it for him.
Yeah, that one's kind of abstract.
Totally. But for one of us, it was when learning about depth first search in a game.
I saw depth first search. That's a good one.
It's like this mind-blowing realization of searching through all these possibilities by recursively exploring each branch.
Like going down one path, then backtracking and down another path.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting here is the contrast between like a textbook example and the real world application.
Yeah, seeing it in action makes all the difference.
Totally. Recursion. It can be a tough concept to grasp at first.
It's one of those things where you kind of have to wrestle with it for a while.
But then when you see it elegantly solving a complex problem, like, navigating all the possibilities in a game,
And then it's like, oh, I get it.
it clicks.
Exactly. It's about breaking down a big problem into smaller, self-similar problems.
And he also mentions the allure of Lisp.
Lisp, huh? Interesting.
Yeah, it's an older programming language, but he really enjoyed it.
Well, it has a certain elegance to it.
And he talks about the joy of creating game playing programs, like chess engines that could actually beat him.
Oh, wow. So he was like competing with his own creations.
Yeah, there's something really satisfying about being outsmarted by your own code.
It's like, you've created something that's more intelligent than you are in a specific way.
Right. And he also mentions cellular automata, which are they're these simple sets of rules.
But they can lead to like incredibly complex
Yeah,
patterns.
it's like that linked list idea again. Big things emerging from small local interactions.
A recurring theme, right?
definitely. And it's interesting to hear about our different first programming experiences.
Yeah, like how we each got into this whole world.
For one of us, it was C++ and Lisp, which, you obviously loved.
He sounds like a real programming enthusiast from the start.
Totally. But for the other, it was kind of a cold, meaningless corporate Java experience.
Oh, corporate Java. That can be a bit soul crushing.
Yeah, it really shows how like our paths into programming can be so
Yeah,
different.
there's no single right way to get started.
Definitely not. Now, moving on to maybe the less glamorous side of programming, the Primeagen talks about his time at a company called Schedulicity.
Oh yeah, I think you mentioned that. What was it, like a bad experience or something?
Yeah, he actually calls it the worst aspect of his programming career.
Really? And it wasn't like, dealing with impossible bugs or anything.
No, no, it was actually the complete lack of challenge. Just doing these repetitive tasks, pulling data, displaying it.
Sounds pretty boring.
It was. And what's interesting is that it was the lack of challenge that actually made it so bad.
It's like, you need those problems to solve to keep you engaged.
Exactly. It speaks to that need for growth, for learning, even in a technical role.
Yep. We crave that stimulation.
Totally. And he even compares it to factory line kind of work.
Ouch. That doesn't sound very fulfilling.
It wasn't. So how does the Primeagen see himself as a programmer?
Yeah, how does he define himself in this world?
He calls himself a tools engineer.
Tools engineer. That's interesting.
Yeah, he's always been drawn to building libraries, systems, things to help other developers.
But like creating the infrastructure that others can build upon.
Exactly. So, for example, back in like 2012, 2013, he made this UI library that mimicked iPad behavior.
Oh wow, back when iPads were still kind of new and shiny.
Yeah, and he also built his own custom JavaScript build system.
So he's always been into like making developers' lives easier.
Totally. And he mentions that his decade at Netflix, it was mostly focused on creating internal tools for developer success.
10 years at Netflix, that's a pretty long time.
It is. And if you think about it, like in the context of big tech companies, internal tooling, it's often this crucial but kind of hidden part of engineering.
It's the stuff that makes everything else run smoothly, but, most people don't even see it.
Exactly. And he makes this brief but important point about, the vast world of programming beyond just web development.
Yeah, there's so much more to it than just building websites.
Right. Like embedded robotics, machine learning, networking, operating systems, compilers,
It's easy to get caught up in like the current trends.
totally.
Yeah.
But the reality is programming, it covers this huge range of specializations.
Each with its own challenges and rewards.
And he even recommends that every programmer should try building their own language at least once.
Build your own language. That's a pretty ambitious goal.
It is, but he says it gives you a completely different perspective.
I can imagine. It forces you to like really think about the fundamentals of how languages work.
Exactly. So now the conversation kind of shifts to a more personal narrative.
So he starts talking about his own journey.
Yeah, he acknowledges that he's had, a hell of a life, including addiction and loss.
It's always interesting to hear the stories behind the people in tech,
Yeah, it reminds you that everyone has their own unique path.
their own struggles.
Exactly. And he starts by talking about early exposure to pornography and its impact on him.
That's a pretty personal topic to share,
It is, but it shows how our early experiences, they can really shape us.
for better or worse.
And he also shares the profound impact of his father's death when he was just 7 years old.
Oh wow, that's incredibly young to lose a parent.
It is.
Yeah.
And he tells this really poignant story about a trip to China where he was told not to talk about God.
Oh, interesting. Because of cultural sensitivities?
Yeah, and he was told to use dad instead.
That's really powerful how those early experiences of loss can shape our understanding of the world.
And he talks about his mother's resilience and hard work after his father's death.
Like how she had to step up and take care of everything.
Yeah, she was working like 18-hour days.
Wow, that's incredible.
And he says that her strength was a major inspiration for him to get his butt kicked back in gear.
So she was a real role model for him.
Absolutely. So how did he go from, this hardship to working at Netflix?
Yeah, how did he make that transition?
Well, he talks about initially pursuing his own startup.
Oh, so he was an entrepreneur first.
Yeah, he was using PHP and jQuery back then.
Those were the hot tools of the time.
They were, and he talks about the lessons he learned, including asking really dumb questions on Stack Overflow.
We've all been there.
Right, it's all part of the learning process.
Exactly. And then he mentions having to get a real job due to some circumstances.
Yeah, including a rather unstable neighbor in Bozeman, Montana.
No, that's never fun.
No, it wasn't. So he ended up working at that boring job we talked about, Schedulicity.
Oh, right, right.
And then after that, he worked at Web Filings, where he was putting in some really long hours, but still working on startup ideas on the side.
So he was like always hustling.
He was, and he
Okay.
talks about the value of those experiences. Learning about corporate life, how to communicate effectively, and he even got exposed to some key technologies like RxJS.
RxJS, huh? That's a pretty popular library for handling asynchronous stuff.
Exactly. And then came the big move to Netflix.
The Netflix, that's a pretty big deal.
It is, but it meant leaving a more secure job for a company with a fire fast kind of culture.
So it was a risk.
Yeah, it was. And he had to move from Montana to California, and he had a young child at the time.
Wow, so a lot of big changes all at once.
It was a lot. And he talks about, the initial intensity and the challenges of adapting to that environment.
It's a whole different world going from a smaller company to a giant like Netflix.
For sure. And what's funny is his first task at Netflix was to go learn some code on a PlayStation 3.
A PlayStation 3, that's not your typical first assignment.
It's not, but he also shares a pretty memorable early mistake. He accidentally broke staging.
Staging, that's like the pre-production environment, right?
Exactly. And it was all because of a misunderstanding of multi-threading in Groovy.
Oh, multi-threading, that can be tricky.
It can. It was this thing with observable sleep 1, where pausing one part of the system, it ended up blocking other parts.
So it brought down the whole staging environment.
It did. And this highlights that, even experienced teams, they can have knowledge gaps.
And assumptions can be wrong.
Totally. It's a good reminder that technology is complex.
And that even the best engineers can make mistakes.
Okay, so moving on to problem solving at Netflix, he describes rewriting the front-end data structure for the TV interface.
Oh, yeah, I think he mentioned that. What was it about again?
It was about better handling recommendation information. He uses the example of like Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis?
Yeah, like imagine you see a Bruce Willis movie and you get recommendations for other Bruce Willis movies.
Right, so the recommendation is tied to the actor, not just the specific movie.
Exactly. And he had to like redesign the way they stored that data to accommodate this.
So it's about like understanding how the data is organized and how it's used.
Yeah, and making sure the system is flexible enough to handle those different use cases.
Makes sense.
And he also talks about developing his print theft debugging skills from his early work on robots for the government.
Print theft debugging, that's like the old school way, right?
It is, but it's still incredibly useful.
Especially when you're dealing with like embedded systems or things where you don't have, fancy debuggers.
Right. And he continued using it at Netflix, even though it was a much more complex environment.
So even at a company like Netflix, sometimes the simple tools are the best.
It's true. And he contrasts this with the temptation that a lot of engineers have to just rewrite code from scratch.
Oh yeah, the rewrite everything mentality.
Yeah, and he emphasizes the importance of understanding the why behind the existing code.
Before you just go and throw it all away.
Exactly. And he tells this great story about rewriting another developer's goofy failure data fetching code.
Failure? What's that?
It was the system they used to get data for the Netflix mobile app, the TV app, the website.
It's like the core data fetching system for everything.
Yeah, and he thought he could, do it better. But after he rewrote it, he started running into all these edge cases.
Oh no.
And he realized that the original code, it was actually the optimal solution.
So the original developer, they knew what they were doing.
They did. And the key takeaway here is the danger of premature optimization.
Assuming you can do something better without fully understanding it.
Exactly. And not appreciating the wisdom that's often embedded in existing code.
There's often a reason why things are the way they are.
For sure. The conversation also touches on security concerns and attack vectors in the age of AI.
Oh, like how AI can be used for malicious
Yeah,
purposes.
and specifically, he mentions the challenges of prompt injection.
Prompt injection, what's that?
It's when someone tries to manipulate the AI's behavior by feeding it malicious inputs.
Oh, I see, like trying to trick the AI into doing something it shouldn't.
Exactly. And this is a growing area of concern as AI becomes more and more integrated into everything.
Makes sense. As AI gets more powerful, we need to think about how to keep it secure.
Definitely. Now, going back to the complexities of big companies, he uses this seemingly simple example of reversing the order of Black Mirror seasons on Netflix.
Oh yeah, that sounds simple enough. What's so complicated about that?
Well, it turned out that it required the coordination of like 20 engineers and multiple VPs.
Really? For something that seems so minor.
Yeah, it's because in a company that big, there's so much interconnectedness.
Like changing one thing can have ripple effects throughout the whole system.
Exactly. And he makes the point that there's no such thing as a small feature at that scale.
It can be pretty frustrating for engineers who are used to moving fast and iterating quickly.
Totally. And he also adds the complexities faced by platforms like YouTube's and Twitch.
With all the user-generated content,
Yeah, dealing with, metadata manipulation, legal issues, copyright, trying to identify inappropriate content.
it's a whole different level of challenge.
It is. So all of this leads into ThePrimeagen's decision to leave Netflix and pursue full-time streaming.
Oh wow, so he went from Netflix engineer to streamer.
He did, and he talks about the long grind of building his streaming presence, doing
Yeah.
it as a side project for years.
Yeah, it takes a lot of dedication to build up an audience.
It does. And the pivotal moment for him was at the Streamer Awards.
Oh, interesting. What happened
He
there?
was given this challenge coin that basically encouraged him to go full time.
So it's like a sign, a push in the right direction.
It was, and he's very honest about the emotional turmoil of leaving a stable job for something so unpredictable.
I can imagine. It's a big leap of faith.
It is. And he talks about the loneliness of being a solo creator,
Uh-huh.
compared to the team environment at Netflix.
That's something a lot of creators struggle with, I think.
Yeah, it can be tough. Now, shifting gears a bit, he talks about learning new programming languages.
Always a good topic for programmers.
Right. And he describes a couple different approaches. There's the hands on the keyboard approach where you just, dive in and start building something.
Learn by doing.
Exactly.
Right.
And then there's the more structured approach where you focus on understanding the fundamental concepts first.
So like learning the theory before the practice.
Yeah, and he points out the risk of just applying your old knowledge from other languages without really understanding what makes the new language special.
Each language has its own way of doing things.
Totally. And he advocates for a more deliberate method where you learn the basics first through simple exercises.
Build a solid foundation before you tackle the big projects.
Exactly. And he also shares his thoughts on using AI as a learning tool.
AI for learning. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and he acknowledges both the benefits and the potential risks.
Like what are the downsides of relying too much on AI?
Well, he talks about the risk of not really remembering or understanding the concepts. If you're just letting the AI do the work.
It's like using a calculator all the time. You might forget how to do the math yourself.
Exactly. Now, when asked about his top programming
The
languages,
classic question, right?
he says it's really hard to name a definitive top 5 because it depends on so many things.
Like what you're trying to build, your personal preferences, the community around the language.
Exactly. But he does list a bunch of popular languages like JavaScript, HTML, Python, SQL, TypeScript, Bash, Java, C#, C++, Assembly, Swift, Ruby, Go, Elixir, Odin, OCaml, Lua, JJ, Zig, Lisp, Clojure.
Wow, that's quite a list.
It is. And he talks about how he chooses languages based on what he's trying to achieve.
So like the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And he also mentions the importance of community.
Yeah, having a supportive and active community can make a big difference when you're learning a language.
For sure. And he mentions his current side honeys for exploration, which are JJ and Zig.
JJ and Zig, huh? Those are kind of niche languages, aren't they?
They are. But he's also a big fan of Go for back-end development.
Go's pretty popular these
It
days.
is, and he gives this specific example of using Berkeley sockets in Jai to read Twitch chat.
Oh wow. So he's actually using these languages for real projects.
He is, and then he talks about this really cool streaming project he did, a Doom ASCII port controlled by Twitch chat.
Doom ASCII. So like playing Doom in the terminal.
Yeah, and he streamed it to the browser so anyone could watch.
That's pretty cool.
And the crazy part is he let the Twitch chat control the game.
Wait, so the chat was playing Doom?
They were. He basically averaged out all their inputs. Like, everyone typing W would move the character forward.
That's hilarious.
And they actually beat the first level.
Wow, the power of the internet.
Right. But the really impressive part was the technical challenge of compressing all that ASCII output, to send it to thousands of viewers without any lag.
Yeah, that's a lot of data to stream in real time.
It was. He had to get it down from gigabytes to kilobytes.
Wow, that's some serious optimization.
It was. He used all these clever techniques like quad trees, run length encoding, and some custom algorithms based on luminosity.
So he basically figured out how to represent the visual information using way less data.
Exactly. And he did it all while keeping the latency super low, like around 70 milliseconds.
That's really impressive.
He also shares his thoughts on social media platforms, specifically X-Twitter.
X-Twitter, huh? What's his take on that?
Well, he talks about the challenges and the potential, beyond just being a comment section.
Yeah, like what could these platforms evolve into?
Right. And he talks about the need for user expectations to change. Because text-based interaction, it's different from visual platforms.
It's a different kind of engagement.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he also mentions the potential of audio-first content.
Audio first, so like podcasts and things like that.
Yeah, and he acknowledges the dynamic nature of X, despite all its issues.
It's definitely a platform that keeps things interesting.
For sure. And he compares the community feel of X and Twitch to the more isolated communities around individual YouTube videos.
That's an interesting point. Like the way people interact on those platforms is very different.
It is. So when asked about the projects that shaped him as a programmer,
Like the ones that really taught him the most.
yeah, he doesn't point to a single project.
Hmm.
He says it's more about the cumulative experience of writing any small program.
So it's about the journey, not the destination.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the value of debugging.
Debugging is where you really learn, right?
It is. And he talks about the joy of creating robust systems that don't break down.
Like building something you can rely on.
Right. And he attributes this to testing and the use of asserts.
Asserts, what are those again?
They're basically checks you put in your code to make sure things are the way you expect them to be.
So if something's wrong, the program crashes.
It does. And he got this idea from a conversation with John Carmack,
John Carmack, the Doom guy.
the one and only. And he learned even more about it from Euron at Tiger Beetle.
Tiger Beetle. What's that?
It's a database company, and they use asserts extensively in their code and in their testing.
Like they really push their code to the limits to make sure it's solid.
You do. And he shares his own experience of using asserts in his projects and finding bugs that he would have otherwise missed.
So it's a really valuable technique for catching errors early on.
It is. And he talks about, not just positive assertions, but also negative assertions.
Give assertion.
Yeah, like checking that something isn't true, not just that something is true.
Interesting.
And he sees this as a skill that you develop over time.
Yeah.
Anticipating weird edge cases.
Like thinking about all the things that could go wrong.
Exactly. And he even has this philosophical view of treating warnings as errors and having very strict asserts.
So it's not just about coding, it's about like a way of approaching life.
Yeah, it's about setting high standards for yourself and not ignoring potential problems.
Makes sense.
And he even mentions this kind of counterintuitive idea of intentionally crashing the program if something unexpected happens.
Crashing the program, that sounds bad.
It does. But the idea is to catch critical errors early on, even if it means a temporary disruption.
So it's about like failing fast.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the importance of providing informative error messages to users.
So they know what's going on.
Right. Now, he also talks about overcoming side quests in programming.
Side quests, like in a video game.
Yeah, like when you're trying to solve one problem and you keep getting distracted by all these smaller
Oh
problems.
yeah, I know that feeling. It's like one thing leads to another, and then you're down this rabbit hole.
Totally. And he says that mastering your instrument, your programming skills, your editor, all that, it helps you, minimize those distractions.
So you can stay focused on the main goal.
Exactly. And he talks about how he can now, you know, program efficiently and confidently because of years of practice.
It's like anything else, the more you do it, the better you get.
Right. And he recommends learning typing and mastering your code editor.
So the mechanics become second nature.
Exactly. So you can focus on the problem solving, the creative part.
Makes sense.
And when it comes to editors, he's a big fan of NeoVim.
NeoVim, huh? That's a pretty popular choice among programmers. Host.